Hello friends, welcome to my command center, and in this live stream we will be discussing about some terrestrial issues which are going to affect our continents and our earth, and we are shifting our focus from space to back home to our home planet. So as we know that the continents on which we live keeps changing, there are a lot of factors, there are natural factors which keep affecting our life, and also about other living organisms which are found on earth. Even the evolution is largely dependent on the conditions which are prevailing on earth. So let's start our journey and understand what is going to happen in next 300 million years. But before we go to future, we have to go in the past. Well, we know that our universe is very evenly divided into 7 distributed landmass, and there are several oceans. So there are so many continents and numerous islands, and we have people living on the shore where there are a lot of industries which are running in different parts of the world. However, I must clarify that the continents and the ocean that we see is ever changing. The face of the earth is not constant, it keeps changing. And why it keeps changing? Because of a phenomena called continental drift. And when we say continent, it's not only the land that we see in our map today, it is also the ground on which the ocean, the water which forms the ocean, is also floating on top. So the entire crust is the continental crust, which actually holds the land as well as the water. In addition to that, there are some climatic conditions which changes the shape of the land itself. For instance, today we don't see too much ice, but a few years back, 10,000, 15,000 years back, there was an ice age, the last ice age, because of which the water was locked into ice. And because the water was less, but it was frozen into ice, the water levels were actually lower. So basically this is what was happening, and the land as we know it today was much larger. At least we get to know about the sunken cities, the human settlement which was sort of sunken in our past. So the whole point is that it's the land that we see and we get so attached to it is something which is not really the main thing on the surface of the earth. These are the lighter materials. The material, because the principle of physics tells us that the heavy stuff sinks and the light stuff floats. So this is like the crust which holds our ocean as well as our land is the lightest material on earth. Of course, there is atmosphere which is even lighter, but when we talk about the rock, it is the lightest rock. The heavier stuff sinks in the bottom below the crust. And because of that, I will cover that soon, but because of this motion, the lighter stuff comes on the top and the heavier one sinks. Because of that, the continent and the ocean crust is made of the lightest material. That is the point I want to make here. And since it keeps moving on top of the heavier stuff, and this motion of continents create different landmass. So we already know that in the past, we have 7 continents, but they fit together like a jigsaw, and they were not separate as we know them today. They were connected as one single landmass in a very large continent called Gondwana. And as you can see, this was Gondwana. Even before Gondwana, there was even a bigger landmass called supercontinent as Pangaea, where the entire land was connected to one another, and the entire land, which is the lightest part which floats on the top, they were connected to one another as one big giant landmass. And on the other side there was a super ocean. Now imagine a situation like this. Of course, this kind of landmass will create a totally different weather system, new mountains, new river system, new lakes, And the evolution will also have a different pattern. The ocean will also have different kinds of current, because ocean will be so large that it'll create a big cyclone. And today we have a cyclone which is powered essentially by the water in the ocean, but then water keeps supplying, and the cyclone keeps becoming bigger and bigger and more violent. But when it hits the ground, it loses the supply of water, and then it dies down after first initial hours, like 6 to 7 hours. It dies down naturally. But if you have a large ocean and a large continent, what kind of cyclones can evolve? So all of these things are being studied. And since these continents are drifting, let us understand in detail why they are drifting in the first place, and why no other planet in our solar system shows this. Simply because Earth is a fairly large planet. It's not as one of the largest planet, but it is large. And because of this large nature of the planet, it retains a lot of heat in it. And because of this heat, most of the stuff, the heavier stuff on Earth, is actually in the molten state. And as I said, the heavier stuff will sink down, the lighter stuff will float. So all the material that we live on, the continents, the ocean, they are actually the lighter stuff. The heavier stuff is under the Earth. The heaviest one is in the core, which is made of nickel and iron alloy, the solid one. And because it is solid, because of the pressure, it does not have enough space to melt. But as soon as the pressure reduces slightly, when we move out of the core a little bit, there's an outer core which is in molten state, which is made of the same material, which is nickel and iron. So probably nickel and iron, probably uranium, that forms the innermost part of the Earth, and hence that must be the heaviest. On top of this, the core, there is again very hot layer called mantle, very very large layer called mantle, which is the heaviest of the rocks, but lighter than the nickel iron, which floats on the core. And this material, which is the heavy rock in the molten form, creates a mantle on which the crust floats. So essentially the crust is floating, similar to anything light will float on the water, like a boat will float on the water. Similarly, our crust, on which the land and the oceans are present, keeps floating around on the molten material, which is mantle. And once in a while these crusts collide with each other. That creates the phenomenon known as earthquakes. So when they collide, they create vibration, and we feel we're such small things in as compared to these things that we're talking here, we feel huge earthquakes. And sometimes these crusts will go one and other, as it is visible in the picture here, one below the other, and start sinking and melting. And when that happens, a lot of water also seeps into that crack. And when water gets into the molten part, it actually becomes steam, and it gets very hot, and it becomes steam. And you know that when steam gets superheated, what happens? It wants to explode. It wants to get out of that high pressure area. So whenever this kind of a motion happens, when one crust goes below the other one, next to that there will be huge volcanoes. So that is this is a process by which the continent keeps changing the shape, and the volcanoes keep erupting, because the steam will make sure that the molten rock comes along with it and comes out as lava. So a lot of steam comes out, a lot of these material comes out from volcanoes, which are predominantly next to where the edges of the crust are. You can actually see where these large volcanoes are. And because of this motion of ever-changing face of the earth, we have this phenomena called the continental drift. And because of this, the continents are never stationary, they keep shifting. So because of this phenomena, what is going on right now? As we speak, the Atlantic Ocean is actually growing in size. There is a ridge in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. One side is the Asia Eurasia plate, other side is Africa, and on this side there is America's plate, north and south. So the Atlantic Ocean is actually expanding. It is right now we have the second largest ocean is Atlantic, and the largest one is Pacific, which is on the other side of America. And now this Atlantic Ocean is expanding, and because of that the Pacific Ocean is contracting, and this motion will make the Pacific Ocean completely disappear in 300 million years. And because of this motion, the Americas and the Asia and Australia, including Antarctica, will collide with each other, forming the biggest landmass that Earth has ever seen. And while this is happening, the Africa is also colliding into Europe, which will also happen parallelly, side by side. And this motion will make sure that the Mediterranean disappears completely, and Africa will join with Europe, and then entire Eurasia with Australia will join with Americas. This will create a new continent in future. Estimated time is about 300 million years. That will be called Amasia, and this is going to be the biggest continent in the history of Earth, creating another super ocean on the other side. Now this will impact the evolution, this will impact the geology, this will impact how the rocks are formed, and how the mankind will survive, where will be the natural resources, what will happen to the life, what kind of new life form will evolve, if humans are around, what genetic changes they will have to endure. Whole lot of questions are there in this. So this is a constant motion, this will continue to happen, and that is why I thought I will talk about this today in our live stream. And if you have any questions, any suggestions, feel free to share your comments, and the best would be to join me live during my live session. Otherwise you can also share your comments, and please take care. I like to end my session today, but I'll catch you tomorrow with more intriguing and thought-provoking subject related to science. So please take care, and I'll catch you tomorrow. Bye-bye.